On February 1st, 1960, 4 students from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College sat in at Woolworth's lunch counter and were denied service. This action was the first in a series of many lunch counter sit-in protests whose aim was to desegregate lunch counters. Black student leaders founded the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in April of 1960 as a temporary coordinating body for the nonviolent movements. SNCC held nonviolent workshops to teach protesters how to act during the sit-ins. They were instructed to walk in, sit down at the counters, and politely ask to be served. When they were refused service, the protesters were to remain seated. They were warned of the foul language that would be used, as well as the risk of violent interactions. The sit-in exhibit at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights welcomes its audience through a series of panels containing text, pictures, and videos chronicling the era of sit-in protests. A mock lunch counter equipped with audio from the sit-ins leaves visitors with a lasting impact, aiming to evoke the same emotions and fear that the actual protests incited in attendees in the 1960s. The lunch counter simulation at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights immerses visitors in the physical experience of the sit-ins, allowing them to fully understand the challenges encountered by the nonviolent protesters.
Although this exhibit relies heavily on a combination of interactions occurring simultaneously, the nonverbal or physical aspect of the simulator uniquely draws the participant into the experience. The lack of sight and increased adrenaline rush caused by the aggressive and intense auditory stimulation primes the visitor for a shock or jolt caused by the sudden sensation of the chair being kicked or struck from behind. These sudden impacts, in combination with the sensation of the crowd gathering around and nearly being able to feel the speaker's breath on your neck and shoulders, effectively transports you back to the actual sit-ins. Yet, however realistic these sensations make the exhibit, it also forces the visitors to acknowledge the greater physical traumas the protesters endured. In my experience, though, it merely reminded me of the even greater torments the simulation couldn't replicate. The possibility of having food and drink dumped on me, getting dragged out and beaten in the streets, or the death threats becoming a reality. To a certain extent, the physical interaction of the exhibit forced me to face this empathetic realization, but the shortcomings of the simulation contributed to this feeling equally.
One of the most significant factors of the lunch counter sit-in simulator were the auditory effects, caused by the voices and noises heard through the headphones. The headphones made it seem as if the voices were coming from behind and to the sides, so visitors would have the same experience as the protesters did in their defenseless positions at the counter. A detail that truly allows visitors to better relate to the anguish felt by the nonviolent protesters was not only the content of the hateful remarks and insults, but the tones and loudness. All of the voices sound extremely enraged and create a feeling of being trapped. As time goes on, the threats become more aggressive and physical as the background noises of the violent scene intensify and become rowdier. My experience at the lunch counter made me very angry while listening, and I felt my adrenaline rush as my temper flared, and I felt the urge to physically fight back at the voices. I was so absorbed in the simulation, I had to take off the headphones and remember it was just a soundtrack, which made me realize how much courage and patience the protesters possess to not fight back while experiencing this in real life.
While many of the exhibits within the museum put a great amount of focus on the visual elements of the exhibit, the lunch counter simulation does the exact opposite. By requesting that patrons close their eyes, the simulation forces visitors to focus solely on the audio and physical touch elements of the experience. The painful insults emitted through headphones and the startling rattling of your seat seems to come out of nowhere when you have no vision. This truly allows visitors to be immersed in the experience and understand the fear and confusion faced by protesters during the lunch counter sit-ins. With closed eyes, you can imagine that you are a young member of SNCC, silently enduring stinging slurs and questions of your character, all while staying silent and refusing to respond with violence. This exhibit shows not only the triumphs of the sit-in movement, but also it demonstrates the great pain it took to achieve those triumphs.